anybody that has tried to do something for so long and got knocked around so much.
This is the story of me trying to tell a
I
story.
kept coming back.
A story about my family, my cattle ranching family from Texas, a family of American commoners. But I'm going to tell you the story of me trying to tell that story in an uncommon way. I'm going to take a little road trip while I'm at it.
Headed down south in the rain.
I'm going to drive all the way down US Highway 83 while I tell the story
Well, listen here.
of the story I was trying to tell.
I won't give in 'cause it's given to give it away. I gotta turn again. I gotta say what I have to say. Hey, told me the story of a simple life out on the plain.
Family. The benefits of family include providing crucial emotional and practical support, a sense of belonging and identity, and a foundation for socialization and personal values. Strong family bonds improve mental and physical health by reducing stress and anxiety, boosting self-esteem, and fostering better coping mechanisms for challenges. Families also contribute to individual success by promoting better academic performance, teaching life skills like communication and conflict resolution, and creating lasting memories. Noah loaded his family onto an ark and sealed the door as a measure of protection from the coming disaster. In the past, I have suggested that we, in America, all need to do the same, metaphorically speaking. There is more than one type of ark in the Bible. The basket of Moses is a type of ark, and of course the Ark of the Covenant, which contained not only the Ten Commandments, but also the very presence of God. The presence of God is a type of ark, the ultimate ark, I would say. And it is inside this ark, the presence of God, that I believe we find our most prized possession in life. An ark of a different kind. Ark spelled with a C, a homonym of ark spelled with a K. That prized possession is our own personal character arc within the context of family. An arc is an imaginary mathematical shape defined by a segment of a circle, while an arch is an architectural solid structure. A character arc is called a character arc because it follows the pattern of the rise and fall of this mathematical and architectural shape. To get to the top of US Highway 83 from Nashville, where I currently live, my first stop is in St. Louis, Missouri. It's an easy 5.5-hour drive. The arch in St. Louis is called the Gateway Arch, and I find that fitting as I am entering through a type of gateway to my own personal character arc within the context of family by deciding to go through with this documentary. And if you're watching it, I've decided. So first let me explain why US Highway 83. I'm a deeply spiritual person and one who believes that I hear from God clearly and often. But for this documentary, I would like to keep my boots on the ground, so to speak, and tell this story in much more pragmatic terms. However, allow me this initial explanation. In 2007, I was a youth pastor in a small town called Perryton, Texas. Someone asked me at the time where Perryton was. I answered, straight north of Groover, Texas, my hometown, and the home of my cattle ranching family, the family of the story I was trying to tell. Someone overheard me and said, Jill, you don't know where you are, and you need to look at a map. I did, and I saw that Perryton is almost due east of Groover. Okay, so I'm a little directionally challenged. No biggie. What happened next was the beginning of a long and mind-boggling adventure. I noticed US Highway 83 running right through Perryton, Texas. I felt prompted to Google U.S. Highway 83. As I looked at this picture, I heard God speak. And keep in mind, this was 2007. Very clearly, I heard the Lord say, "There is coming a division in America that will be the equivalent of the Civil War. But this time, it will not be North versus South. It will be left versus right." God didn't ever speak to me about topics so out of my sphere of control until that day. The presidential election of 2008 began the most politically polarizing journey America had ever seen. So now, on with my story about how I was trying to tell the story of my family. I come from a terribly divided family, and telling the story of my divided family has a unique dynamic in that if you want to find someone to blame, you'll wind up blaming Hitler. And no one that I know of has a problem blaming Hitler. So, while it is still a sad story, it seems easier to tell due to that dynamic. When I take road trips like this, I approach them as spontaneous adventures whenever time allows. So, if something along the way catches my attention, I have to go after it if there's time. The first thing that jumped out at me on this trip was this. Why in the world is there a Churchill Museum in Missouri? That was my first thought. My second thought was the fact that I had recently started watching the Netflix series The Crown again from the beginning. Almost the entire first season of that series is as much focused on Winston Churchill as it is the royal family. Winston Churchill is one of my most inspiring heroes of all time. I couldn't believe I was going to get to see this, and on this trip of all trips. It was only a few minutes out of the way in Fulton, Missouri, between St. Louis and Kansas City. I found the museum on the campus of Westminster College. The small museum has outdone itself. What a treasure to stumble upon. When I bought the ticket, 2 young men were giving me a map and directions through the exhibits, and one said, "When you circle back around, you'll wind up here where you started, and this exhibit will explain why in the world there is a Churchill Museum in Missouri." Winston Churchill was encouraged to accept an invitation to speak at Westminster College by President Harry S. Truman, a native of Missouri. It was here, right here, that Winston Churchill delivered his Iron Curtain speech. The speech was actually called The Sinews of Peace, but due to the use of the phrase Iron Curtain, it became known as the Iron Curtain speech. The point of this powerful speech was to warn the world about the dangers of the expansion of communism, and to point out that an invisible line had been drawn from Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, a line Churchill called the Iron Curtain. The importance of seeing and understanding this, as Churchill points out in this speech, is that war can find any nation wherever it may dwell. What Churchill was ultimately preaching that day was the necessity of the permanent prevention of war. I say Churchill's preach of the day would also contribute to the permanent prevention of family division caused by generational trauma. I'll dive into that more later. Some would say that the invisible line Churchill referred to in this speech that day would indeed later manifest in what was called the Berlin Wall, affirming that Churchill was not a warmonger, but an accurate strategist that the world should keep their ear tuned to. I hadn't even gotten to Highway 83 yet, and the adventure had already begun. When I get my mind on something like this, I have to continue on in a deep dive no matter how many times I've done it before. So as soon as I left the museum, I pulled up Netflix on my phone with the thought of listening to The Crown as I drove. Instead, I found an undiscovered, recently released documentary called Churchill at War. I was thrilled. As I drove and listened to this documentary, the main theme that continued to echo was the fact that America was the only hope for the West during World War II. Churchill was, in essence, all alone up against the giant known as Adolf Hitler. Not coincidentally, I guess, my trip down U.S. Highway 83 would begin in West Hope, North Dakota. That is, right after I drove 6 miles north to the border of Canada to make a U-turn. just to officially start at the very top. This would also be the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, which is a Jewish celebration centering around family. I personally observe the Jewish feast every year. These celebrations mark a time of leaving the former year behind you and embracing the new beginning of the new year. This is one reason I love observing all the fall festivals. This Jewish festival always begins on the evening of the harvest moon. My plan had been to wake up in West Hope and grab a cup of coffee at this adorable little coffee house and read a real printed newspaper. Because I was trying to capture footage of this harvest moon, that timing didn't work out. But if it had, the headlines that I would have been reading there would have covered our current president, Donald Trump, trying to strike a peace deal on behalf of the Jewish people in Israel. Once again, America was showing up as the West Hope in this tragic war. Donald Trump had, no doubt, made some Churchill-style moves in this effort already. We would all hold our breath and see what the week would prove up. So, now that I've made it to Highway 83 and captured my shots of the harvest moon rising in the east and the sun setting in the west, let me begin telling you the story of the story I was trying to tell about my family. This is my great-grandfather, Homer. This is his precious wife, my great-grandmother, Pearl. I am a songwriter and, well, a storyteller. These two raised 10 children out on the plains of Texas, surviving both the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. Their story needed to be told. So let me take you on the journey of trying to tell this story. In 1993, which was the year before I moved to Nashville to pursue fame and fortune as a songwriter, I had this idea for a live show that would not leave me alone. I've told only a few people about this idea because I've been holding this idea up my sleeve for future use, but I'm going to tell you here and now because why not at this point? Here was the idea that would play out in my head over and over that year. A train rolls in on the tracks. 5 horses with riders in chaps and hats ride alongside the train. Smoke billowing, the train begins slowing down. As the train slows, a sidewall of a boxcar begins slowly lowering on hydraulics. Bright lights shine from within the boxcar, and the lowering sidewall becomes a stage. The trick riders dismount onto the stage flawlessly. They hit a downbeat, and the concert begins. The open pasture in front of the train is full of people in lawn chairs and on blankets feasting on pre-made picnic supplies packed in large coolers. The lead singer is a female, and I knew that the female in this idea was supposed to be me. I knew that show would be all about my cattle ranching family from Texas. This idea almost plagued me, but I would say to myself, that's a really cool idea, but I'm not doing it because I can't get away from the cowboy culture I grew up in fast enough. I was a hippie songwriter, not a cowgirl. That was the end of that. I took off for Nashville and barely gave it another thought. Fast forward to 2003, 10 years later. I spent almost a decade on Music Row and decided I was simply not cut out for the fun and games of 90s Music Row. I was never good at politics and passive-aggressive corruption. Eventually, I wound up back in Texas in a downtown Fort Worth apartment. It overlooked my own heritage. My cowboy relatives would load up a cattle train, exchange the cows in the Fort Worth stockyards, buy brand new Cadillacs, and race each other out on the plains all the way back home. The idea came calling again. I had a dream in that apartment, and after that dream, I knew I had to just commit to the idea and write the songs once and for all. I started a few songs in that apartment, but didn't finish any of them. Fast forward another decade and some change. I managed to continue to procrastinate, still not wanting to do this, but the songs kept slowly coming, in a way writing themselves whether I liked it or not. So I finally locked myself in a house in Angel Fire, New Mexico for 2 weeks and swore I wouldn't come out until every last song was completely written. I recorded the album in Amarillo, Texas, purposely hiring area musicians to capture and honor the sound of the area, the sound of my people. It's not easy making the decision to release a story album about your family, especially when the story involves a division that took place within the family. I didn't know if I would ever actually get the guts up to release this thing. I agonized over exactly how to tell the story in a live show. I wasn't sure people could even make sense of the story. I wasn't sure I had made sense of the story myself. But I held fast to that one thing. I knew that if you wanted to blame someone, Hitler was the one to blame in this story. I finally found the nerve to do a live show in a little venue south of Nashville, verbally weaving the story details in between the songs. The original main message of this show was return to love and reconcile your family relationships because we need each other. The response of the small, sold-out audience was shocking and thrilling. Not only were they able to clearly follow the story and appreciate the main message, they wanted more detail. I promptly went home and threw up a black curtain on a curtain rod behind me, turned on a camera, and repeated the show by myself, just me and my guitar, again, weaving the story details in between songs. I plan to share this video with stage directors and theater folks who knew what they were doing because at this point there was no doubt in my mind that this project was destined to be a multimedia stage production. The story album would serve as a soundtrack to the stage show. Once you had seen the stage show and understood the full story, the album would then serve as a reminder of how precious family is and the importance of reconciling relationships. After sharing my black curtain film with a former music business friend, she talked me into taking it more seriously, editing it, and entering it in the Anthem Film Festival. I happened to be taking a Helen Marin masterclass on acting, and she was teaching the art of wardrobe and set design. I made a trip to Goodwill, and with $1,000 budget total, I made a little film. That little homespun film won Best Original Score, Anthem Film Festival 2020. I still feel a little embarrassed or reluctant to tell that part because it was, after all, my friend who had talked me into entering the film who was responsible for voting for this particular award. She assured me, though, that this was a legitimate vote when considering the voting rule, which stated that the award should go to the film whose music most supported the story. Okay, I'll take it. It was now time to finally mix the album and release it. But then, COVID. During the pandemic, I had rented a friend's house in Texas for a month in order to mix the album in Texas. As the pandemic dragged on, I couldn't get into the studio very often, and I wound up staying 9 months, attempting to release some songs here and there, but I finally realized 2020 was simply not the year for releasing this project. However, it was during that year that some important realizations began to come. I started to more and more clearly see my family's story as a micro, with the story of America as a family being the macro. America had suddenly become one big dysfunctional, divided family. A new main message for the project became clear. What divides a family divides a nation. Something was always delaying the mixing and releasing of this album. Before I could ever get the album mixed and finally released, I felt led to take the time to write a book version of the story. The book is called Glory and Warfare and contains some rather weighty Christian perspectives. So, since I'm staying boots on the ground for this documentary, I'll move on.
Little Indian boy looked across the shore, saw the ships come sailing in south.
In 2023, I had decided to move back into the RCA Victor building and put a small team together. I had managed a mastering studio in this building throughout my time on Music Row in the 90s. This would be the perfect place for many reasons to return full circle and finally launch this album. Once a team was assembled, off we went. We released the album and did a 2-month tour of small venues in Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, and Alabama. And the response became exactly what I was hoping for. With tears in their eyes, audience members would reach for my arm and say things like, "I just texted my cousin. We haven't spoken in years." Or, "Wow, the minute you started playing these songs, all I could see was my own family's story." Or, "I think we're from the same family," and then they'd laugh. After this, I immediately began working on my best amateur play script as soon as I got home from that tour. It was Franklin Theater or bust for me. Franklin Theater is my favorite little stage in all the land, and just down the road from where I was living at the time. I was so excited that it was all finally culminating into this stage production. I had it all mapped out in my head. Each song would feature a separate musician. I would have a Homer hat made. I would wear the lace chaps. I had titled the album Common Ground after the last song on the album, which reminds us of another important message from the project, which is, we all have roots in common ground. I decided I would call the stage show Return to Love. I loved that. It would all be so great. It's December of 2023. I've had COVID off and on for almost the entire year. I cannot stop coughing. We were all set for the Franklin Theater debut, including a backup artist ready to perform her album in case I couldn't go on. By a miracle of God, I stopped coughing in our sound check and never coughed again the entire night. The show had been pulled off, and the response was even more reassuring, my favorite being, every family in America needs to see this show. The main messages, like what divides a family divides a nation, and return to love and reconcile your relationships, were all hitting home even more than I'd hoped. But then I heard a third counselor repeat the same thing to me, and I finally heard it. I mean, really heard it. I sat in a chair across from yet another counselor in a list of counselors that I suddenly needed, desperately trying to understand what had just happened. That's what narcissists do, the counselor said plainly and almost nonchalantly after I'd told him what all had just taken place. What? What do narcissists do? I asked in despair. He began to explain, but I interrupted him, saying, "Wait, I'm confused. I'm so confused. I know that I'm the narcissist in this picture, so I want to make sure I understand what you're saying to me." I loved that he was being so black and white and was just laying it out there for me, with no beating around the bush or watering it down. "No," he said emphatically. "You are not the narcissist in this picture, Jill. Your husband is. And this is what narcissists do." I knew what gaslighting was. You know what gaslighting is. I knew I was married to a gaslighter. We talked about it and tried to work through it often. I was doing podcasts for this family story project and talking about how only love can heal a gaslighter, convinced I was living that story, that my husband was being healed of gaslighting and would have one of the only testimonies of a healed gaslighter that I knew of. Eventually, that is. What I didn't know was what narcissists do.
I've been misrepresented one too many times, and I've learned softer ways to let myself out. Misunderstandings are different than lies, and I'm learning how to stand my ground.
I didn't have a clue what narcissism even was, even though I thought I knew. I bet you think you know what narcissism is, and I bet, unless you've had the same personal experience, you'll be shocked to find out what narcissism actually is. For a while I was saying, if you know, you know. If you don't ever want to come to know what I've had to come to know about what narcissists do. I thought I would never talk about it because why not spare people if they didn't need to know? I eventually changed my mind, and here's why. A leading expert recently said that narcissism is our current #1 public health crisis. But for me, I was starting to see this to be true on both the micro, personal level, as well as the macro, national level, and specifically the political level. Once again, the micro and macro parallels were glaring more than ever, and I saw a great need to talk about this on the macro level, the political level. People have been talking about this for centuries, but I feel that it's necessary to talk about this at this time through my particular lens and experience. What sparked the need for these counseling sessions was the most devastating and confusing ordeal of my entire life. But oh, how it did open my eyes and heal a lifetime of blindness.
Too much bridge under.
My husband was a childhood friend. We grew up together in this same farming community. I actually met him when he was 2 weeks old and I was still in my mother's womb. Our mothers were friends. His father was the high school quarterback and my biological father was a receiver. He's also musically talented, and when we first got together, we formed a gospel duo. At one point, I knew I had to return to and finally finish the Common Ground project. He seemed happy to help by playing guitar for some of the project. By the time the Franklin Theater show came around, we'd been married for 5 years, believing we would work our way through to a solid, healthy marriage eventually. Shortly after that show, my husband informed me that our pastor's wife had pulled him aside at church one day when I wasn't there, and with no one else listening in, she told him that when she saw my Common Ground presentation, she saw mental illness, narcissism, and she was concerned I was destroying him. So, let me back up and then get through this part as fast as possible so I can get to the real point of this documentary. By the constant encouragement of one of my team members who happened to be friends with our pastor and his wife, I invited them to our house to present the overall Common Ground project. The pastor and his wife supported the project seemingly wholeheartedly, and the pastor even prayed over me and introduced me at the album release party. They also both continued to send support texts to me leading up to that theater show. Apparently, though, something the pastor's wife witnessed that day caused her to perceive me as such. In an email exchange, the pastor's wife admitted she had said this, but added that my husband had left out the fact that she had also said that I pour out life when I lead worship and that I'm an incredible talent. These claims only made my head spin in confusion all the more. Then she went on to say in this email that she hadn't talked to my husband since then. Sadly, it was soon discovered that the two of them had had a months-long private Facebook message thread going about my mental health condition. I accidentally discovered this a few weeks after the email exchange. I watched her name pop up at the top of his private messages as he held his phone and winced.
You must decide what side you're on. Are you a snake? Or are you a song?
My husband's constant lying and gaslighting had gotten to me long before all of this. While I felt I needed to continue to have grace for it because he seemed to be sincerely continuing to work on this lifelong issue of lying and gaslighting, I had become a frazzled mess only a few years into our marriage. I was frustrated, I was physically sick, I was exhausted, and without realizing it, I had simply had all that I could take of it.
Double-minded man is one that won't stay. 'Cause I'm in this game. I'm here to win. You're reliable liar. Got me at last. I have decided what side I'm on.
I had covered for his lies and facade in the name of grace for far too long. I thought love was winning, and if I could just hang in there and continue to find more and more grace, we would be gloriously triumphant over this lying issue someday. Again, as a part of the Common Ground project, I had even done a limited series political podcast where I was talking about the darkness of political gaslighting and claiming, without mentioning my husband's name, that I had witnessed love heal the gaslighter, referring to him. I thought he was healing. I thought together we were healing. I've been very public over the years about my ongoing journey of healing from childhood trauma. A few weeks ago, I did a whole Facebook post or social media post on mental health and kind of titled it, I Have Mental Health Issues. And the truth is, I believe that all of us, to some degree, have mental health issues. And I just don't think that there's any way that's not possible. It would be a very, very small percentage of people on the globe that do not have mental health issues. And I say that because we have all been through trauma. So any pointing out of mental health issues where I was concerned felt like throwing stones at an overweight woman on a treadmill who'd already lost 100 pounds, for crying out loud. I had been working harder than anyone I know for years on my own personal issues. And if you ask anyone who really knew me, they would tell you I had maybe even worked too hard on it. However, let me be clear. If anyone witnessed my increasing levels of public frustration for what was actually going on behind closed doors with my husband, there was justifiable cause for confusion, and I needed to get help. And this finally drove me to get the help I needed. Most people think of narcissists as those who are grandiose and arrogant or stuck on themselves. While these things are surface symptoms of narcissism, they're actually quite the opposite of the truth, and not even a drop in the bucket of the real sickness of narcissism. The fact that I didn't understand almost anything about narcissism caused me to hold on to hope. But here's what narcissists do. Narcissists falsely narrate and fabricate stories about their target both verbally and non-verbally. The non-verbal part is extremely important to understand. Narcissists covertly recruit what's called flying monkeys, not my favorite term in the world, and they do this through these verbal and non-verbal false narrations for the sake of support and spreading the false narrative. Narcissists cause people to perceive them as the victim hero and their target as the narcissist. This part is mind-blowing until you understand how they're able to do this. I had known this was going on, I just didn't realize it was a serious sign of narcissism because I didn't yet know what narcissism was. I would talk to him about how he was clearly telling people half-truths to make me look like the problem and him look like the victim. He would leave out details of what he had done to cause my frustrated responses. But still, how could this convince someone that they were seeing narcissism in me? I didn't think this added up. I was in a group therapy session reeling about this one day. I asked the group therapist this question: what percentage of time is a narcissist able to convince others that their target is the narcissist? The room went dead silent. I assumed that they were all attempting to give this question a fair percentage calculation. The therapist finally said, 100% of the time, Jill. I could feel the others in the room thinking, wow, she still doesn't get this. I came back, but wait, even if the people claim that narcissism is what they've seen in me, what they've experienced in me, again, the therapist said, 100% of the time, Jill. In other words, that's what narcissists do. But this condition is way more serious, and when you look into these details on both the micro and the macro political level, you begin to have revelation. Narcissists were never telling you the truth. It was all a lie all the time. Narcissists only tell you what you want to hear so that they can get what they came to get from you. And there is no other consideration in their minds or empathetic feelings in their heart about it. Only an unbelievable amount of energy to keep up the facade until they fully get what they came for. Narcissists are going to have you and her too, or him too. This is a matter of speech, but you understand what I'm saying. Or they're going to have this and that too. That should make more sense as we keep going. Narcissists are, in effect, rapists, whether sexually or not. They've come to plunder and leave your emotional carcass there to dry and disintegrate. And it goes on into deeper and more serious issues. In early childhood, narcissists create the uncanny ability to build a shame-killing narrative in their minds within a split second. From that split second, they fully believe the shame-killing narrative they've created as if it is reality, and they process no other truth from there on out. That is, unless someone can work with them long enough to get them to see the truth. I spent 7 years of marriage saying, but that's not what just happened at all. This occurred almost on a daily basis. For years, again, in the name of grace, I would talk him off the ledge of a dishonest narrative and watch the relief of the actual truth come over him. In my counseling journey, I was referred to world-renowned experts. In studying and discussing this ability to form a new narrative within a split second, I began asking if narcissism had ever been studied as akin to dementia. Each person I said that to would pull their head back, tilt it, and look toward the ceiling as if to say, wow, you might be onto something with that. But upon further research, I found that it has been considered. But the conclusion is that there is evidence that far too much self-control is still attainable by choice for the narcissist, and therefore it cannot be considered to be any form of dementia. Narcissists do not take stock of their own actions, and they do not receive accountability, even when they're acting like they are. You will never find a narcissist seeking counseling to ask if they are a narcissist. This is almost an inside joke for me because I continued, counselor after counselor, trying to convince them that maybe I truly am the narcissist in the picture. I almost wanted to be the narcissist because that way I could fix the problem. They would assure me again and again that if I was a narcissist, I would never be asking that question. Narcissists will tell you what you want to hear when you're trying to hold them accountable, but every attempt at accountability will lead to silent, seething anger, and you will pay dearly for it sooner or later, most likely never seeing it coming. The level of insidious retaliation is beyond cause for serious alarm. Narcissists create an uncanny, almost mystical destruction within the celebratory elements of life. In other words, the narcissist will somehow see to it that your parade is rained upon. Narcissists are never listening to you to hear your needs and come to understand you. They are always listening, even hanging on every word, which can make you feel so heard and so understood, but they are listening only for the sake of gleaning information they can either take advantage of, play on, or hold against you later. In listening to one expert who coaches over 200 counselors worldwide every week over a Zoom call, I discovered that therapists are encouraged, if not required, to have at least 2 other therapists tether the one therapist who is counseling a narcissist. Think of the implications of that. The one counseling the narcissist can too easily get sucked in by the lies and confusion and lose track of reality and what's actually true in the sessions. I had to listen to my spouse very carefully to keep track of what was going on, but only by learning that whatever he was communicating was almost always the opposite of what was actually going on. It's like having to decode communication. I knew all of this the entire time, again, convinced we would overcome it all eventually. I just didn't understand it to be narcissism yet. This listening and discerning, or decoding, requires the help of the Spirit of Truth, which is the only way I personally made it through this ordeal. Imagine the ordeal on a political level, which we are all subject to on a daily basis. Lies, lies, and more lies. Gaslighting, shame and blame shifting, false narratives, redirections, distractions, and so on. While my situation was deeply painful, I believe I gained a voice of expertise and keen awareness of how to safely maneuver through it all. I know what it is to face the facade and feel like a fool for ever believing it was real, or that it would somehow all work out one day. Our divorce was technically final on April Fool's Day of 2025. I know what it is to look back and have to face the wholesale lie. It is a crushing pain to know that something you believed was so real, such a beautiful experience, and a beautiful plan from the beginning was in reality not real at all. Not one single sentiment or portion of it. It is every bit swallowed up in the hidden agenda. which is the totality of the whole experience. I know what it is to stand in the ruins of such betrayal, and betrayal strictly for the purposes of self-preservation and self-serving personal gain. While I thought I knew what I was getting myself into in the beginning of our relationship, after all, I'd been observing him do this to women for years at that point. But I believed he was sincere when he came to me in the beginning, declaring he was ready to fully change his ways. Be sure to keep that in mind as I now move this all into the political arena. But before I go political, let me say this about my family and about this project. I couldn't be more proud of my family heritage. To carry the messages of the Return to Love show and the Common Ground album through the story of one American family, which seemed to echo every American family in one way or another, was the honor of a lifetime. I suggest that everyone sit and write the story of your family, even if you never plan to share it. Digging into the rich soil of heritage will change a person in the most valuable ways. No matter our differences and divisions, the story I'm still going to tell you here, our family is wonderful, wild, and wonderful, and the most precious commodity any of us ever possessed. Before I tell you that story, let's move to the family of America first. When Donald Trump won the election, and we all stared at that blinding red map the next morning, the left was baffled. The next day, I watched all the left-leaning programs. Hosts sat stunned, asking each other how they'd missed it. What were we not listening to? One sincerely and desperately asked her co-hosts. I'd like to take this documentary and answer that question for the family of America right now. First, you might want to know this about me. My stepfather used to call me his bleeding heart liberal. My mother once overheard me talking to my sister and said, "Well, Jill thinks she's a liberal elitist." I simply spoke my mind and true heart with no political stance at all. I've always just naturally had a heart for the people, the commoners. My mother is one of the most politically intelligent people I've ever met and probably should have been in office herself. I was in the music business and surely echoing the sentiments from my friends and cohorts that I truly agreed with. But I knew nothing about politics whatsoever. I mean nothing. I didn't even know what either one of my parents meant when they said these things. I didn't know a liberal from a conservative or even what either one of those terms really meant. And I'm not exaggerating. It wasn't until 2007 that I started really paying attention to politics. You might also need to know that I have greatly struggled with Donald Trump and even posted on social media before this last election. We cannot do another 4 years of this. You might also want to know that I was politically smitten watching Barack Obama at the 2004 Democratic Convention, but only for a moment. I bought his book and began to see things layers deep in his background that I believe would adversely affect his political life. I am a political centrist, as it turns out, which so many are suddenly claiming to be now in 2025, but people have said to me, "You're the only true political centrist that I know." My politics, though, have seemed confusing to people. I don't know how to make it any more clear than this. If I sense the heart of a good father in a political decision or direction, I vote that way. I speak up about it, and I stand up for it. Now, with all that said, I'm going to come right out and say what I have to say to you, my wonderful left-leaning friends and fellow Americans. The political left is lying to you. I know you've heard it a million times, but just like I'd heard a million times that I was codependent, I still wasn't getting it. I still wasn't listening. They are doing what narcissists do to such an extreme degree, and they have been doing what narcissists do for so long that you are convinced Donald Trump is the narcissist in the picture. Please consider what I'm about to say. What I had to finally fully see through intense rounds of counseling and processing is that I am a codependent, and codependents use verbal and nonverbal signals that attract narcissists. Codependents are actually attracted to narcissists because they sense their deeply rooted pain and they want to fix it for them, which, as it turns out, is not possible. Narcissists are attracted to codependents because they quickly pick up on those verbal and nonverbal signals and know immediately that this is someone they can exploit, take advantage of, lie to, gaslight, confuse, and plunder until they get what they want from them. I had to open my eyes to the fact that I had lived with and attracted narcissists my entire life. I had known about my codependent tendencies, but because I didn't understand what narcissism was, I didn't understand how this whole thing worked together. When you open your eyes to these patterns, the political narcissism becomes crystal clear. I know the feeling of being swept off my feet by the charisma of Barack Obama and that smile. My goodness, that smile is utterly convincing, not to mention that swagger. But forget the smile and the swagger and all the charismatic charm. Forget his words and track what he does, what he is still doing, and what he has done almost all of his life. He, along with almost everyone politically aligned with him, does what narcissists do. Narcissists search out the most vulnerable, rejected, neglected, or traumatized people to exploit. They say all the love-based things you want to hear. I often get along with left-leaning people in my life better than the right-leaning people because lefties are loving. I like loving people. But I've opened my eyes to the sad fact that my left-leaning friends are following political narcissists based on promises, platforms, and premises only being used to plunder, to get what they want, but ultimately leave the commoners of America completely high and dry. When I say commoners, I'm including celebrities and the rich. It's important to point that out. I urge you to study the patterns of their actions versus their words. It's not about what they say, it's about what narcissists do. These patterns are a mad-making mind mess that we have to become fully aware of. For years, Donald Trump was clearly considered by the elites as white trash from the wrong side of the tracks, relatively speaking, of course. He wanted to be accepted and endorsed by the elites because he wanted to prove himself successful and be seen and approved of as successful by the political elites. He donated loads of money to their campaigns. As time would prove, the elites would never allow that. He was never accepted into the club. This created a deep-rooted personal vendetta that festered within Donald Trump for years. In certain versions of the filming of Barack Obama speaking at the 2011 White House Correspondents' Dinner, you can easily catch the sense that while Donald Trump was officially invited, the elites in no way welcomed him there. Donald Trump is seated at a round table in what looks to be the center of the room, directly facing the podium. Barack Obama begins to basically roast Donald Trump from that podium, as the room laughs hysterically. As Donald Trump sits unamused, a look comes over his face that I perceived to say, "That's it. I'm running for president, and I'm going to undo everything you do as soon as I get elected." In a book called Thou Shall Prosper, the author points out the contrast between two magazine articles. One was an article on America's greatest love stories. Each love story was sadly based on relationships of ongoing infidelity. The other article, called CEO Killers, was based on CEOs who had fired a certain number of employees that year. We all know of the undeniable greed machine in America, but hear me out. Narcissists tell half stories to make themselves look like the victim. My husband was telling people a half story about a fit I threw, a fit that got exaggerated when I tried to throw a half-full cup of water I was holding to the floor. Centrifugal force took over, and the cup wound up flying across the living room and breaking a window. He would lace this story in heartfelt empathy for my troubled childhood and assure his audience he was doing his best to help me out in life, but I was a hard case. The truth of that story is that moments before I threw the cup toward the floor, He had accidentally revealed that he and a distant female friend of mine had been pretending for a whole year, as we three did ministry projects together, that the two of them had not known each other prior to my introducing them, when in fact they'd had an ongoing conversation through a dating app just before he and I reconnected and married. He accidentally revealed this 2 weeks into our brand new marriage. Now, here is some political and cultural narcissism at its best. The author of the book points out the narcissistic half-story in Newsweek, which basically claimed that these greedy CEOs were ruining the economy for the American commoners by cutting these jobs. The fact was, the total employees fired that year was 137,000. But that same number of new jobs was being created every 3 weeks in America that same year. Furthermore, had these CEOs not made those necessary spending cuts, their businesses would have failed, causing the loss of all the other jobs still available within those companies. It goes on to point out the atrocity of the immeasurable understanding and sympathy for adulterers in this country who cause more pain for more people than any lost job ever does. Yet, if you are a CEO cutting back costs so you can keep your business healthy, you are condemned as immoral. I've learned over the years that when you have to end a relationship with what I now understand to be a narcissist, you lose almost every relationship you had at the time due to this astonishing understanding and sympathy for the narcissist, and even the adulterous narcissist. Now that I understand narcissism, I've seen the patterns and proof that I have had many narcissists in my life. In the past, it has always taken somewhere between 1 to 2 years for people to see the light, come out of the confusion that a narcissist's false narratives have caused them, and attempt to reconnect with me to apologize for their confusion. Most of the time, that has only been a small percentage of friends and family members. In this same way, political narcissism is causing more confusion, division, and loss of relationship in America than ever, and at an alarming rate that I would even say is equal to the pace of Hitler's aggressive invasion. I will stay out of the depths of the rabbit hole here, but I urge you, my friends, to look into the hidden agenda with wide open eyes. As Churchill urged Roosevelt, I'm urging you now. This will eventually affect the entire globe. We desperately need to unify as commoners. I encourage you to take a minute and think about the accuracy of AI data. It is exponentially more accurate than any data in history. So now, take that thought and move to targeted propaganda. Targeted propaganda with absolutely accurate AI data. We all have a star on our sleeve at this point. Imagine if we don't stay in relationship and united in community, how powerful this targeted propaganda will get. It is only through talking with mutual respect that we can keep each other protected. Each party searching for the truth, constantly comparing political notes. At the end of the day, the hidden agenda is a covert type of global genocide rooted in many facets. To name only one, a false fear and/or a false narration of overpopulation and disbelief in any eternal God who would miraculously provide a solution. This is not the ethnic cleansing of the past. It's a class cleansing, and it doesn't get more Hitler than that. This is the exact opposite of the desires of the hearts of my friends on the loving left. I don't say these things in fear. Again, Churchill's permanent prevention of war must always be awake and active. I wholeheartedly believe in continued full victory, but we must wake up and see political narcissism for what it does. I've heard it 1,000,000 times if I've heard it once. The word narcissism is being so overused. I have a very different view of the increasing use of the word narcissism. I perceive that it is surfacing to get our much-needed attention in the political realm. An alarming portion of our government continues to align with narcissism, and this is a matter of life and death, of liberty and bondage that we need to act on now, right now. Donald Trump, as it turns out, is more like a frustrated codependent that I can identify with. Maybe I've struggled with him out of sheer projection of my codependent frustrations. He is sick to death of the mad-making lying left running this high-level, covert agenda right under the foolish noses of my dear friends, the left-leaning commoners. This, my friends, is what you are missing. It is what you have not been listening to, and I urge you to reconsider and listen. What began as strictly a childish personal vendetta in Donald Trump has evolved into a true awakening for him and subsequent authentic championing for the commoners of America. That is what is unfolding before our eyes. I flipped on the news in a hotel room on this trip to hear Kamala Harris yelling at an audience claiming that she had lost the election only by a few votes. Give me a break. To the contrary, on election night 2024, the mass majority of Americans, some even reluctantly, had made their voice clearly heard. By midweek of my road trip down U.S. Highway 83, Donald Trump had facilitated a problematic yet legitimate peace deal between Israel and Hamas of historic significance. The left calls Trump another Hitler. What do you not understand? He's defending the Jews. Hitler murdered them. Now, back to the story of the story I was trying to tell. Homer and Pearl farmed and raised cattle and 10 children in Hansford County, Texas. Out on the plains of Texas, they survived both the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. Homer died at the close of the Dirty 30s. He had a funny last name for a cattle rancher, but the name was German, originally von Kluck. It was later shortened in America to Cluck, like a chicken. Their youngest son, Joe Davidson Pike Cluck, is my grandfather. He was drafted and fought in the Pacific during World War II. To be specific, he fought for the U.S. Armed Forces in Okinawa. The details of his experience are too horrific to share. He was only one of 2 boys in his troop that made it out of there alive. When his brothers were called and told to come pick him up, they were also told that Pike was mentally spent and would never be the same. This is where the blaming of Hitler begins. A very interesting dynamic in all of this is that my grandfather, Joe Davidson Pike Cluck, had a German father, Homer, as a matter of fact, a German general in World War I by the name of Alexander von Kluck, who died in Berlin in 1934, bears a striking resemblance to my grandfather. Furthermore, my grandmother Pearl's maiden name was Davidson, as in David's son, which quite possibly points to a Jewish bloodline. Bloodlines, and specifically generational trauma and turmoil within bloodlines, fascinates me. This was indeed a strange war for Pike to fight. Years after Homer's death in 1940, and years after the war was over, the brothers began to discuss the prosperous concept of bringing corporate cattle feed yards to our area of Texas. My grandfather, Pike, stood adamantly opposed to this idea, stating that long-term he felt it would be a detrimental endeavor. Due to his disagreement and refusal to participate in the plan, Pike was asked to take his cattle and move off the homestead land. Over time, a blend of both concepts would prove to be a great method. Pike suffered from severe post-traumatic stress syndrome in a time when no one understood what it was or what to do about it. In the eyes of his brothers, any argument Pike might have had could not be taken too seriously. After all, they'd been told he was mentally spent. I'm quite sure his initial responses to this debate were considered not workable for the brothers. Some members of the family were permanently divided over this, and a deep-rooted bitterness made its way down the bloodline. My mother was, of course, raised by Pike. She and her mother and her younger brother all suffered the ongoing effects of his post-war mental and emotional health. She also suffered other deeply traumatic events in her young life, like the death of my biological father when she was pregnant with me. Later, she suffered the death of a son, my younger brother. A doctor told my mother that she had miscarried me on the day my father died. In her already deeply traumatized psyche, she naturally disconnected from the expected child, and the struggle to reconnect and remain connected to me would prove to be a lifelong challenge for both of us. Swimming in the ever newly manifesting tentacles of generational trauma is much more difficult than you might realize. The overwhelming effects of generational trauma cannot be denied or overstated in our case, and there's very little we've ever been able to do about it. Relationships have remained entirely strained over the years, seemingly beyond repair. One would think that it's so apparent to just let love heal all wounds, but it is somehow more complex than that simple answer has ever been able to provide. My marriage was almost the only remnant of family I had left, or so I believed it was. I know the pain of divided family and deep loss of relationship. I know the agonizing loneliness that comes over and over again. I've learned and encouraged others with similar family issues to create family wherever you can. Within your family, among your friends, your coworkers, your church members, anywhere. Just create family. God is the great Redeemer of all things. My wonderful son and his wonderful wife both grew up in Nashville. They moved back to the Nashville area from the Dallas-Fort Worth area not long before my marriage dissolved. We have spent such healing time together, and I am so grateful and excited to announce that they have twins on the way. Instead of shame, God gives us a double portion. One of the most frequently asked questions in response to Return to Love was this: what do you do when you can't reconcile a relationship? I've clearly had those relationships in my life. Boundaries are not easy for me, but I've had to learn the importance of boundaries over the years. I recorded an album that I thought was going to be a good response to this question for these audience members. I had no idea that the recording and releasing of this album would run a simultaneous timeline with a divorce I still didn't see coming. I knew the marriage issues were critical, no doubt, but I simply never believed we wouldn't get past it all. One thing I didn't understand about narcissism is the narcissist's extreme retaliatory response to being outed. So, when I spoke publicly about the ordeal with the pastor's wife, the narcissism became exponentially dark and destructive. This too is critical to understand and keep in mind on a political level. At one point in the process, I heard myself say, I am through allowing people to lie to and about me for the sake of self-preservation and personal gain. When I said this, I heard the word through as meaning through, as in through it, and on the other side of it. I called this album The Other Side, and its initial purpose was to lovingly hold the hands of those who have to choose to let go and walk away from unhealthy relationships. The songs were to give hope, give warnings, inspire them to hold on to love because there's nothing quite like love, and even to establish that we are not here to judge others. Almost prophetically, the songs would wind up getting me, myself, completely to the other side of a lifetime of tolerating narcissism. I believe this is where we are as American commoners. It is crucial that we stop tolerating political narcissism and that we stop tolerating it now. The songs on this album were a random collection of old and new songs, and those songs from my catalog that I felt were most inspired by my 1970s Laurel Canyon influences. I've referred to this album as my deepest dive into the questions of love and relationships. I went out to Los Angeles for some other business reasons, but I had a half plan to film a smartphone documentary about the Laurel Canyon singer-songwriters that shaped my writing. I immediately headed for the Palisades first because I wanted to see and pray over the horrific fires that had happened 5 months prior. I was headed that way when I was abruptly stopped by 4 men in camo holding automatic weapons. They very harshly informed me that the area was still blocked and I needed to make a U-turn. This really kind of threw me off. It just felt like something we don't experience, or at least we shouldn't experience in America. It felt like a flashback of a trip I took to Belfast. So I headed for Laurel Canyon and turned on a Laurel Canyon playlist. I wasn't in the mood to be all that creative after that, so I blew off the documentary idea for the day and I never did return to it. But as I listened to the songs on that playlist driving through the canyon, I realized that every song was written by some songwriter trying to understand love and relationships. From the beginning of time, we've all been trying to figure out the pain we put ourselves and others through and how to stop doing it. And just smile on your brother, everybody get together, try to love one another right now. It's important to understand that both narcissism and codependency, and in fact all relationship issues, are deep-rooted trauma responses. Both the narcissist and the codependent are stuck in past pain that is still echoing out in very real ways in the present. Both conditions can be healed, but it takes quite a journey of understanding and, quite frankly, hard work. I've never seen God wave a magic wand over these things, although some people will claim that. I think this is possibly a dangerously misleading claim. It takes a daily battle of committing to walking in the light of the truth, and specifically the truth about ourselves. We were in counseling, and without calling it narcissism and codependency, I now understand that the counselor was slowly leading us to this understanding, and we were having and celebrating a massive breakthrough. Then, enter the voice of the pastor's wife. Eventually you realize that generational trauma in itself is all-out emotional and mental war. Fredericksburg, Texas is one of my favorite little spots on earth and has been since I was a new folk artist at the Kerrville Folk Festival in the late 80s. I visit there as often as I can. It is also home to Admiral Charles Nimitz. Admiral Nimitz was the commander-in-chief of the Pacific Ocean areas, commanding Allied air, land, and sea forces during World War II. I've spent time at the Nimitz Museum in Fredericksburg on several occasions. I've walked through the Japanese garden, sincerely forgiving on behalf of my shattered family and praying for peace for all those involved. In all my attempted fact-finding for the Common Ground Project and the Return to Love stage production, I never realized until this road trip that Okinawa, where my grandfather fought, was actually the very battlefield that finally ended World War II. It would begin with Winston Churchill, and it would end with Admiral Nimitz. Because we must stop tolerating narcissism at any level, but especially at the political level, this forces us to also accept necessary division. I'm currently a student at LA Film School, earning a bachelor's degree in writing for film and television. They sometimes hammer the understanding of a protagonist, including the study of the protagonist's character arc, which unfolds through what Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey. While I have my own personal character arc in it, I have never been the protagonist of this family's story. I'm simply the narrator, and in some cases the surrogate character. My World War II veteran grandfather has always been the protagonist of this story in my mind and in my heart. In the hero's journey, the hero ultimately returns home with an elixir to share. This was Pike's elixir, to recognize the necessity of division in some cases, of drawing a line and standing for what you believe to be true and right, no matter the cost. What may have seemed like stubborn pride or even mental illness was surely gleaned from the muddy foxholes of Okinawa, the speeches of Winston Churchill, and the strategies of Admiral Charles Nimitz. He knew firsthand the gruesome and evil realities of what a twisted mindset could cause in the long run, or even one bad decision, which can lead to another and then another. I believe he forgave his brothers. I believe he genuinely loved his brothers, but he kept his line drawn. While I was out doing what I sometimes call my hope-de-do Homer show, pushing love and reconciliation, sugar and spice, and everything nice, I was having to learn this very same thing. Whenever I've thought of that red line down the middle of America that is U.S. Highway 83, I would think of it as representing the left and right commoners meeting in the middle, rising up from under the fog of politics, reconciling and unifying in great love and a sincere effort to take care of each other as commoners. I am all about reconciliation and unity. I will never stop doing my part to encourage, inspire, and initiate relationship reconciliation and unity on both the micro and the macro levels, but especially within family. I hate division, and as much as I don't even want to say this, I too have had to accept the cold realities of necessary division, both on the micro level and the macro level. I believe we all have to accept this reality and reconcile whenever we can, but draw and stand on our dividing lines whenever it is necessary. This red line down the middle of America now holds this double meaning for me: reconcile and unify whenever you can. Accept necessary division, draw your line, and stand when you must. As I've explained, I am a believer, and as much as I want to honor you by remaining pragmatic, I have to share that I believe that unhealed victims of generational trauma such as codependents and narcissists are hostages of the real war, the spiritual war. As much as we have ever prayed for the release of hostages of physical warfare, I believe we need to pray even more for these hostages of spiritual warfare. The key to the prison cell is repentance. And if I were going to focus on repentance for either narcissism or codependency, I would start by understanding the root causes for narcissistic and codependent behavioral patterns. In other words, by asking the question of why these behaviors exist in your life in the first place, you'll see and understand and be able to receive God's healing love and forgive yourself. Then, the gift of repentance, turning away from these behaviors, will come. There's a forgiveness prayer that I live by. It goes like this: Name, I forgive you. And it's important to say the person's name. Name, I love you. Name, I release you from any judgment I've held. Name, I accept that you are where you are on your journey in life and I am where I am, neither fully right, but both flawed and sinful. But name, I hold on to hope for our future, even if that future can only be in heaven. So, what I was saying was, return to love and reconcile your relationships because we need each other. But to return to love is to repent. I recently heard a story of a woman who had a very sick child and she needed money in order to save the child. So she did something that she didn't morally believe in. The ironic cost of that was, once the child was healed and grew up, she couldn't teach him her morals without condemning her own life. This is just an example of why repentance for the sake of generations to come is so important. It's not simply returning to the act of loving each other. It's returning to God's love, and in His great love, and only in His love, we receive the ability to sincerely forgive, wholeheartedly repent, truly reconcile, and honestly reunite. I now see repentance and forgiveness as the left and right hands placed together, ready to pray. I always thought and said that love would win. I love the pastor's wife, and that's not some obligatory love. I really honestly love her and her husband and their church with a sincere heart. I was ordained for a second time under their incredible ministry. I love my former husband. I have loved him since he was a little boy, and I will always love him. I have also finally learned to love myself through all of this. But I've come to realize that it is not love that will fix these problems. Love will help a great deal, but the only thing that will fix these issues is sincere and radical repentance. To conclude, and this is the last thing I thought I would ever find myself saying as a part of the Common Ground or Return to Love projects, but here goes. I actually believe that we need to stop cowering to political narcissism and the hidden agenda, and we need to prepare our hearts to stand our ground, draw our lines, and possibly become even more necessarily divided in America in the coming years, but only in cases where it's absolutely necessary. A public relations person once said, "The Common Ground Project and the Return to Love stage show is a love letter from Jill to her family." If that is so, and I were to write a postscript to that so-called letter, it would say this: P.S. I am here for you. If you ever need me, I am only a phone call, text, private message, or visit away. Don't ever hesitate to reach out to me, especially in times of loneliness or trouble. To be honest with you, I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to produce this documentary, and the entire time I was on this trip, I was fighting it. I didn't even want to bring the subject of common ground or return to love up again. It's been 2 years since the theater debut, and this is the first thing I produced regarding that project. Once again, I was feeling led to do this, but I didn't want to do it because, once again, I don't know how to do this exactly right. I don't know how to tell any of this without making mistakes that I can't even predict, much less avoid. As I was driving down Highway 83 in one of those northern states, I noticed a billboard that read, "Who is Q?" or "What is Q?" I can't remember, but when I saw the billboard, I said in my goofy little brain, because this is the kind of thing that my goofy little brain does, I said, well, in Hansford County, Texas, Q is my cousin Quentin, and I think if you folks up here met him, you would love him. I babysat Quentin and his older brother when they were little. They were my younger cousins from within my cattle ranching family that the story was about. He grew up following in the footsteps, raising cattle in Hansford County. When Quentin was about 3 years old, he sat in my lap while I was teaching music for Vacation Bible School one summer. I was instructing the kids to march around the sanctuary while singing loudly, "I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never zoom over the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army." Quentin was not in the mood, old enough, or even of the extroverted personality enough to do such a thing as that. So I let him sit in my lap instead. In the middle of the song, Quentin bit down on my thumb so hard I screamed. The children stopped marching and singing and came running to me. We all laughed as we examined the little Q teeth marks in my thumb. 2 days after seeing that billboard out on Highway 83 and saying that goofy thing in my head, Quentin took his own life.
And you can't give in 'cause it's given to give it away. You gotta turn again, you gotta say what you have to say. Hey, hey, hey. Truth is rising, I am flying now. Just say I own this, and I'm sorry, and I won't ever walk this way again. Say let's start over, and let me show you that I really can be trusted like a friend. When the next one went, they did it all again in their cowboy hats and their Cadillacs, and another one gone. Everything comes back around, so don't stop making mistakes. We got the little red hen with the seed in her hand in the land of the hungry cutthroat. We got the burnouts from the smoke pit and a bunch of dirty sheep standing around in a field doing nothing. We Got the greed machine with its silent genocide, and we're all standing around blind, and that's something. All but who's to say who's right or wrong these days? And who do you think you are to criticize my ways?